for joining us all this morning. I know it's nice and cold, but thank you for joining us to discuss the 2021 NGEN Award Brief. So before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of this land, and pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. So I trust you would have all had a chance to read through the brief in full and have a question or two for the Indigenous Literacy Foundation to really help you tailor your campaign to suit the challenge. So I'm Monia Montefusco. I'm chairing today's NGEN briefing on behalf of the MFA, and I'm also joined today by Lisa Flower from the Indigenous Literacy Foundation and Kate Holland from UN Limited. They'll be answering your questions very shortly, so remember to send any questions through via the chat, or at the end you can also just ask them directly. So just make sure your mic is on. Okay, so the MFA Awards. So for those of you who have not heard of the MFA Awards before, they have been championing our people, our work, and our industry for over 2 decades, and really highlight the value that media agencies contribute to clients' businesses. And how do the awards tie into NGEN? Well, the reason we are here today, the NGEN Award. So what is the NGEN Award? So for those of you who are unaware of the purpose of NGEN, it was launched in 2008 with the aim of nurturing, developing, and inspiring the 50% of people working in this industry with less than 5 years experience, our NGENers, so that's all of you. So as part of the MFA Awards program, we have the NGEN Award. And the NGEN category is specifically designed to recognise and reward a variety of valuable skills you no doubt already have, and most definitely need to succeed in this industry. So why enter? Apart from the obvious reason, like doing something meaningful for charity, like raising money and solving a real life issue, the NGEN Award holds a level of prestige within the industry, and to be named the 2021 NGEN winner would come with a huge number of positive outcomes, as well as getting the opportunity to bring an idea to life. But it will also help accelerate your career, develop and explore your existing skill set, and you'll be challenging yourself against your peers. So the charity. So this year, the NGEN Award charity is the Indigenous Literacy Foundation. So now, let's immerse ourselves in the world of the Indigenous Literacy Foundation and watch a short video which really tugged at my heartstrings. And then Lisa will chat through the brief and ILF in more detail.
Teeny weeny icky keeny was a sad bird with a yellow cross.
What is it? No way, Irkapai, you're not eating meat today.
Yellow duck, what do you see? I see a blue horse looking at me.
It's a real sense of joy and excitement when kids see their language represented in a book, and it's the books that they want to read. We are producing books created by Indigenous people from the remotest parts of our country, and kids are seeing themselves reflected in these books. They want to pick them up and share with their families.
The language is how we pass on culture, traditions, and share our identity with the world. It's an essence of who we are.
12 children was involved in watching No Way Irkapai. It came out from themselves. They started to draw a picture, different animals. Then I put the name of the animals all in Tiwi.
I speak 3 languages. Tija, Wurora, Larrabee.
Here at Pidgidanga, we're making books in language, and there's 5 languages, plus English, plus Aboriginal English.
The impact comes from the community in that it's community-led. So we are empowering people to tell their own stories.
Elders in the community and all the different people come together to make these books. It's a collective process.
I'm feeling proud today, sending all the books that we give out to mums and carers to take back to their home and read with their kids. Some of them just took more than 2.
We've been able to gift out books to 280 remote communities nationally, responding to the diversity of needs in each community.
Changes I've seen in the children since our relationship with the ILF is a love of reading a lot more often, and they're recognising the value of learning to read and how that can create opportunities for their future.
They're getting up early and excited to go to school, and it's good. They can teach others.
To the parents, I suggest that you read your kid in both languages. So we won't lose our identity and what our ancestors taught us.
Yeah, it's important to keep our culture strong and to pass it on to the next generation. My child is the voice of this future.
My child is the voice of the future.
Kakajuwe wata, ngiramini in the future.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Lisa Flower, and I'm the Marketing and Communications Manager for ILF. And I've been with the organisation since March last year, so at the beginning of COVID. So it was a very interesting time to come into the organisation. But first, before I explain a bit more about the brief, I just want to give you a bit more of a background on remote communities. I don't know how many of you have been to a remote community, but often if you haven't been to a remote community, it's difficult to understand the challenges in these communities. Because I often get asked, why don't the schools have books? Why can't they purchase books? Well, there's a number of reasons. These remote communities may have less than 800 people, some have 200, some have less than 50. Their schools are very small, they're underfunded. Often when you've got schools in remote areas, they do have to pay more for their teaching staff, and often they may do things like put on food to and get kids to come in. So they might put on a breakfast or lunch to try and build up attendance, because attendance is quite low in remote and very remote communities. Some of these communities are like 9-15 hours drive to a town where they can access books at libraries. So that's a very difficult, very difficult to access books. Most residents in these communities don't have credit cards. There's a lot of welfare. Food is an expensive item there, because you can imagine the logistics. There's not economy of scale, so food is very expensive, and often that's the priority purchase. So money is limited, and books have not been the high priority, because it's culturally, books are a new a learning tool that they've had in the last 200 odd years. So there's a lot of background issues around why children in remote and very remote communities are needing to improve their literacy skills. Another little interesting snippet is that many of these kids speak, before they go to school, 3, 4, even 5 languages before they go to school, and English may not be one of those. So you can imagine when you transition to school and you don't speak English, and suddenly you're going to an English environment, everything's in English, and you're starting to learn the alphabet. I had an interview with a woman last year, and she's only in her 30s, and she said when she had her son and she heard them speaking and reading in English, she said she didn't even know that the alphabet had sounds attached to it. So there's a long way we've got to go. So this just gives you a bit of an idea about remote communities and the challenges that they have before we even look at literacy issues. So we'll just move to the next slide. The Indigenous Literacy Day is a really, really important day for the ILF. The Indigenous Literacy Day is really about a celebration of languages and stories in a community. And last year we did say celebration of literacy and language. Literacy is a big word. It means a lot of things. We tend to think literacy is reading, but it's multi-literacy, as you can probably imagine, there's environmental literacy, there's financial literacy, there's environmental literacy. There's a whole stack of different literacies in the communities. You've got kids that know that when this particular flower blooms over here, there's going to be fish in the river 200 kilometres away. There's a whole, mountain of literacy that extends well beyond reading, that extends, 10,000, 20,000, 60,000 years ago. So we're trying to incorporate a broader sense of what literacy is, because Indigenous children, Indigenous people in Australia have a very sound understanding of literacy, but not in our Western concept. So the audience for our Indigenous Literacy Day is really Corporate Australia, because they're a big part of our funding body, and they support, we've got, some strong support from Corporate Australia. We have a large supporting community. We have over 26,000 people on our regular database now, which we communicate to monthly. We have, thousands of people on social media and all our platforms. Educators are a big supporter of us, particularly educators who have worked in remote communities, because they really understand firsthand the needs of literacy support. And of course, the Indigenous families living in a remote community, they are also on our social media platforms, and we communicate to them not the same way we communicate to General Australia and our other supporters, but we communicate to them through other EDMs and bits and pieces that we, for targeted conversations with them. So that's our audience, but all these people are watching Indigenous Literacy Day on the day, or participating in some way. And the trick that we have with Indigenous Literacy Day is that it is an opportunity to fundraise, but we don't want that to be a key element, particularly with our Indigenous families watching, because there is this sense that we don't want people in remote communities to feel like, oh, we're the poor people that need, white saviours to come and raise money so we can improve our traditional literacy. So we're trying to look at this in a very, frame it in a very positive, enlightening way. And the concept is to try and fundraise on the side just to our non-Indigenous supporters. So there's a little bit of a balancing act there with how we do this. Just the next slide, please. So the challenge, of course, is to celebrate the day across Australia, make it a big national celebration of the achievements and the wonderful celebration of literacy in our remote communities across Australia, in Indigenous languages, literacy, reading, and other literacy forms. Secondary, it's to inform our audiences about this incredible culture that we have in Australia, and how we can really educate people and bring awareness about the value that has in our community. So of course, when we talk about promoting Indigenous Literacy Day, we have to be really mindful about making sure that it's culturally appropriate for all our audiences. And there's a couple of things that we can touch on later. We'll just look at the next slide and we'll talk about the brief. I'm hoping that, or I'm understanding that you've all read this brief. It's quite detailed, and I'm sure there's lots of questions, but ideally we'd love to raise some more funds and build awareness around Indigenous literacy across Australia. Predominantly now we have a very large audience in Sydney and Melbourne, and a lesser audience in Western Australia, South Australia, and in Queensland, although that is gradually growing now. So with the building of the awareness, we also hope to build the need for support. We are a growing organisation. We have a 5-year strategy now that we're going to really focus on building the language components, because I don't know if you're aware, but UNESCO has identified the next 10 years from 2022 to 32 as a decade of Indigenous languages. It's really important that we help preserve these languages in Australia. So when a child learns to read in their own language, they are far more likely to succeed in learning a second language like English. So it's really important, these pre-literacy skills and early literacy skills that we develop in a young child, they are learning to read in their own language. Not only does it help them in their reading success in English, it also helps with their well-being, with a sense of identity and autonomy of knowing who they are and knowing that their culture, their language matters. So it's a whole string of reasons why language is really important. Many of you may not know, but there's about 250 languages spoken, Indigenous languages spoken across Australia. There was 850, I think, years ago, but it's dwindled down. Languages are getting lost, and it's really important that we help to maintain them and preserve them. So at the moment, at this stage, there's about 20 languages that are spoken regularly in remote communities. Creole is quite a well-spoken language in the northern parts of Western Australia, Northern Territory and Queensland, where we operate. And that now has been formally recognised as an Indigenous language, where before it was, you may have heard of things like Pidgin English, or I know there's some other words that they use where you've got a melding of two languages, but Creole now is a recognised Indigenous language, and even in Creole has numerous different dialects. So you might have one community speaking Creole here and another community, 100 kilometres away speaking a completely different version of Creole. So lots of language, facts and figures there that are quite interesting. Yeah, so I think the campaign, what we're really hoping from you guys, because I know we've got some brilliant young minds out there, we would love some thinking around how we can communicate to our audience, which is Australians across the board, but predominantly our focus or our supporter base is people who are generally, well, our supporter base are largely women. They're educated, many educators. They're also women in the legal profession and the social services industries. We have different campaigns throughout the year, and we get, we're doing quite well as far as our donations goes on end of year campaign, for instance, but this is a different audience. With Indigenous Literacy Day, we're really trying to build awareness and secondary to build a fundraising component in there, and would love to actually build a supporter base where people continue on our journey, not just a one-off, oh, this sounds like a good idea, to really understand the needs, to understand the culture, to want to learn more about the culture, and then thus, see the value of giving back and helping leverage First Nations peoples in that literary space, and understanding that it's incredibly, they're smart, their Indigenous education is enormous. Their understanding of the land is just phenomenal, and we have a lot to learn from them. So it's not just a one-way process of us teaching them English. It's really about us understanding their languages and their culture as well. And I think that's a lot of Australians are now open to learning more about that. So without further ado, is that the last one I've got? I think so. So I'm going to introduce Karen Williams, who is our ED, our Executive Director, and she's been with the organisation for 11 years. Here's Karen.
Hello, my name's Karen Williams, and today I've been told I'm speaking to some of the most talented and dynamic young people in Australia today. So welcome on board, and thank you in advance for helping to develop a campaign that tells the story of the Indigenous Literacy Foundation and why our programs and engagement with communities in remote Australia is vitally important. But first, a story. Molly de Piggy Piggy is a story by a first-time author called Karen Mambaloo. Karen Mambaloo is an elder based in a community about 3 hours northeast of Katherine. This book went on to sell 10,000 copies, which is remarkable in Australia for a first-time author. But the most incredible fact is this book is the first book that Karen's grandchildren have seen in their own language. In the remote communities that we work in right across Australia, the barriers to literacy are enormous. Often there are no books in homes, there are no books in a child's first language. To travel to a library or a bookshop may be a 15-hour journey. These are things which are very hard for us living in cities can possibly imagine, and we take everything that we're exposed to for granted. Our foundation's work is about gifting books where there are few to none. It's about working with communities to help them create stories in their language. It's about revitalization of language. It's about giving kids in remote communities the opportunity to succeed at school, to learn to read and write, to enjoy reading, because reading opens a door to a world of opportunity. So we are proud to publish, to work with communities, to publish books in first languages, and we hope your campaign will help us gift and produce more books to more communities and children in these communities. Thank you.
Great. I hope you all felt inspired. So NGENers, over to you now. We're really keen to understand if you have any questions that Lisa and Kate can answer. So over to you. Any questions?
We did have one question come through. So I think this is for Lisa. Is there a particular way we refer to the Indigenous community in our submissions?
Look, that's a really good question. So we refer to people living in remote communities as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders peoples or First Nations peoples. I was explaining to the team before, we are moving away from the word Indigenous, although, you know, then UNESCO, because Indigenous is all incorporating. I mean, you know, are we Indigenous to Australia? Not question. But so I'll refer to them as First Nations peoples or Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, Islander peoples, not Islanders, singular. That's not acceptable. You have to have peoples at the end.
Awesome, thank you. Another one's just come through. So is there anything that should be included in the entry, like phrasing or creative, etc.?
Anything you should be avoiding entry? Yes, that's a really good question too. What we don't, as a non-Indigenous person, we don't use the words deadly, yarning, mob. That is an Indigenous word or a First Nations word for their people. It's just a courtesy that I don't use those. But if I am referring, if I want to use those words, I'll get one of the Indigenous team to, and I'll film it or get them to quote it. So I won't use that directly. Other wording, I wouldn't do any acronyms like the Australian, the ATSI. That's not appropriate. I think when you're talking about appropriate language, I would always, as I do, I always run it past my Indigenous colleagues and just check with them about wording. Very much in the brief it states, you know, we don't talk about deficit and disadvantage. That's not what we are about. That's not our philosophy. We really focus on achievements. So we shine a light on the positives of what the achievements, what's happening, what are the great things that we're doing, what are the amazing things that we're getting from community. So just around the wording, I think just to keep positive and to just watch what words you use and, you know, run them past a colleague, Indigenous colleague, or someone in your community that if there's a reference group or even your cultural liaison officer at your local council, they can be great to run things past if you haven't got somebody at hand.
Awesome, thank you. So we've got a couple more questions. So Sophie's just asked, they're coming through now, hang on. Sophie's just asked, would the team be open to expanding the audience to men, or is there a reason for the female skew?
No, I think you can definitely open to men. It's just that we find that women, as you know, and I'm generalizing here, as more nurturers, they respond to children's needs, and because we've got a skewed population in the education, it's particularly in early learning and in primary education to female teachers, we have a lot of support from the females. Not to say that we don't have men in the corporate world. We have a lot of males who will lead the partnership. But generally speaking, it just on all our social media and all our, you know, subscribers to our newsletter, there's a skew towards females, but very much open to men. I'm not going to say that we're not targeting men, because we're certainly keen to build that audience.
Great. So I've just got another question here. So if we are Aboriginal ourselves, should we mention this up front in the response to ensure no language is misread or misinterpreted?
Absolutely, absolutely. That would be great, and we really welcome to have Indigenous representation. You know, that's fantastic. Love to see it.
Awesome. So another one, does our submission have to be related to the client we work on, or can we just create our own ideal campaign to support this? Because using whatever we feel would best fit.
Sorry, I'm not quite sure I understand. Which question is that?
From Lisa.
I'm sorry if this is a really stupid question. I haven't heard too much about the program. Does the submission have to be related to the client we work on, or can we just create our own ideal campaign to support this cause using whatever we feel would suit best? Are you suggesting, Lisa, that you don't want to use the brief as a guide, that you have some other ideas? I'm not sure what the question.
Yeah, maybe Jess or Nicole, this one might be for you. Maybe Lisa, if you don't mind, we'll come back to you on that question if that's all right. Yeah. So Alice has asked, what would be the average donation to the foundation?
For one-offs, and I'll just tell you for the end of the financial year, I'm looking at about $145. For our regular donations, of course, it varies from $20 a month up to $50 a month. Then we've got our corporate, which is, of course, quite different.
And we have broken that down in the brief as well.
Awesome. So another question, Kate, you might be able to answer this one. So in the brief, it is mentioned that we can explore unlimited partnerships. Could you please tell us where we can explore this list?
Yeah. So if you jump onto the Unlimited website, it will have a list of our partners on there. So essentially, Unlimited tap into the media marketing and advertising industry. So if you think about any of the media owners that you currently work with, we would also work with them to unlock inventory to access. So if you have an idea about bringing something to life through out of home or TV, we can leverage the partnerships that we have with those organizations to bring that to life.
Awesome. Thanks, Kate. So Darcy has just asked, what sort of campaigns have been used in the past? What have been the learnings?
Okay, so we have our end of financial year campaign, which is very much about educating people about the need, the why. And we've used all sorts of different short video snippets, and EDM's by far the most effective on that. We have a build your library, which is a campaign that we work with educators to purchase some of our commercial titles that have been written by kids and adults from remote communities. And that's really about diversifying your library to have more Indigenous content. And that's been very successful. We currently have a campaign rolling out called Reading Opens Doors Library, which we have selected 17 award-winning novelists, Indigenous authors, that we're putting into a portable bookshelf that we're putting into, we're selling to corporates or to businesses to put in their staff rooms or their boardrooms. And the concept is to broaden your understanding of the triumphs and challenges of Indigenous Australia. Campaigns that have been successful is probably our Great Book Swap has probably been our most successful campaign over the last 10 years. And that's a simple process where we encourage children, schools, to host a Great Book Swap where a child brings in their favourite book, pops it on a table, takes another book and puts a gold coin donation. And we have a target of $350,000 the last 2 years for our Great Book Swap, and we get over, well, last year was a phenomenally different year, but generally before 2019 we had about 700 schools participating. This year we're targeting 1,000 schools and 300 businesses, and at this stage I think we're a third of the way there. Most schools will have this Great Book Swap during NAIDOC or on Indigenous Literacy Day, and they're very successful campaigns.
And I think just to further that for your question, Darcy, we haven't really done many media campaigns beyond a bit of owned social and leveraging the partnerships that are listed in the brief. So this will be a first for Indigenous Literacy Foundation.
Awesome. that is all the questions oh, hang on. No, we've got one more just come through. So with the target market, is there a particular age bracket you would like to target or focus on?
Look, with the 25 to 35-year-old is the most engaged in this. I think there's a lot of cultural awareness. I'm working actually now with Snapchat on an 18 to 22 target, but you know, I don't expect them to have the same financial resources as a working cohort. So look, I think anyone that's working, it does appear to be the more educated people value education, or literacy people value literacy. We're a charity of the book industry. We have a lot of support from the book industry. So people who value literacy, whether they be 25-year-olds or 55 or 85-year-olds, that's our market. So as far as age goes, it's broad. On social media, we have predominantly that 25 to 35, but our general supporters across the board.
Awesome. So we've got one more question. If you don't mind hanging around for another couple of minutes, if that's all right. So are you looking for a media first approach, or can an activation much similar to what you mentioned about the schools be also used with amplification through media around that?
I think that we could look at I'm open to looking at all sorts of you know, approaches. So I'm keen to hear, you know, to look at them all. I'm happy for you to do what you think you could look at as far as looking at different approaches, for sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Doors open.
Cool. Now we've got a couple more questions come through. I don't know, are you guys happy to stay on for a couple more minutes, or should I get these answered afterwards?
I can stay on.
Okay, great. So another one that's just come through. So what are some targeted communication that has been done with the First Nations people through social media? Do you have any?
So that's we have a different separate Facebook page for our Indigenous communities that we work with. So we don't do targeted directly through our ILF pages. It's targeted directly to communities through a separate Facebook page.
Great, thank you. And are we able to use more than one media metric to express our idea? E.g., could we use Snapchat and out of home?
Yeah, you could. Yeah, look, you could. I'd be interested to see what you think of a Snapchat, because I'm still in my inexperience with Snapchat. My sons use it. I'm interested to know how that even works. So yeah, look, doors open. You know, if you're creative and you can think of a way that's new and engaging, and you can, I think of the Snapchat, and I could be wrong, but I think the Snapchat community, you know, we're nurturing them, building the awareness. They're culturally conscious people, young people, and I know Snapchat said they have 96% of that cohort using Snapchat. So there's an incredible amount of coverage and reach. And if we can nurture them through, you know, it's 10 years time, they're going to be potentially in a position where they can be, you know, it's really strong advocates with us financially, but they can definitely be social media and awareness building advocates now if they can't financially assist us.
Perhaps can I just add, just to answer that question, is just have a think about, regardless of what channel or platform, if say Snapchat, for example, just think, if you're thinking media metrics, just think about how do those media metrics relate to the objectives in the brief. So I think if you can just correlate those media metrics to the objectives, then I think that will kind of help with your response as well. So I trust that helps.
Awesome, thank you. So we've got a couple more, but we might get those answered after. I think we've run a little bit over time now. So guys, if you have, just pop some questions into the chat. We will get those answered to you. As Nicole has just mentioned, there is a pack that you guys can download. She's kindly put that into the chat. So if you don't already have that, jump onto that link and download that. But any further questions, we'll get those answered, and I will send those out to you if that's okay. But can we just say a big thank you for Lisa, Kate and Monya for your time this morning. It's been so helpful for our guys, and we will share any questions that have come through afterwards and get those answers to everyone, if that's okay.
Thank you very much, everyone, and particularly Kate and Monica. I really appreciate being invited, and Really excited to see what you guys come up through. And please send any questions through. We'll be more than happy to answer.
Yep, and on my behalf, thank you as well, Lisa, Kate, and NGENers for your awesome questions. If you have any more questions, hit us up. Otherwise, just head to the website. There's some more information on there, as well as some really practical tips on how to enter and write that award-winning campaign. So good luck, everyone, and see you later. Bye.
Good luck, everyone.